Hello and welcome to the Bucket List. Up today, we're speaking to award-winning journalist Mark Tighe. Many of you will know Mark for his work kind of exposing the FAI recently, and then his kind of big book with Mark Rowan, or what's your
Paul
most
Rowan.
recent? Paul Rowan, called Champagne Football, which was kind of just like an in-depth look at John Delaney, who used to be the FAI president, his time as president, and kind of the fall of the association during that time, and all the kind of corruption that came with him, and the ridiculous kind of extravagant events that he had. I think the most memorable one is his
50th birthday party, 007 team's birthday party.
So, but it's amazing. Like, so Mark picked a book called All the President's Men, which is about the Watergate Scandal, which is written by Bob Woodward and Bernstein, who were kind of the journalists that exposed Watergate, which was this massive scandal in 1972, which was basically run by the Richard Nixon government and was trying to, get at the Democratic Party, and basically cheat their way to victory in the election. So they exposed this, and then eventually that led to Richard Nixon resigning, not being impeached. He would have eventually been impeached, but he resigned before all that kicked off. So it's kind of an interesting parallel that the book that he chose, he then kind of was in a story very similar to that, and he was exposed in power.
Yeah, and in the interview he says that he even kind of on some ways of writing the book, he looked back at All the President's Men and how they told their certain bits of the story, like the courtroom, the scenes and stuff like that, the super injunction John Delaney tried to secure. Fantastically, he didn't, because that was kind of how all the news came out. Without that, if he had got that super injunction, who knows what would have happened next, because there's a few other men who are very powerful in Ireland who have used super injunctions to their benefit to stop negative news stories of them coming out and their businesses. So it's great that one wasn't secured.
Yeah, but one thing that kind of came clear during the interview as well, I asked him about the defamation laws in Ireland, which are very archaic in comparison to most kind of Western democracies. And it just kind of shows how in Ireland, if you have a bit of power, you can really get away with a lot of stuff by just basically threatening the legal route to the papers.
Absolutely, yeah. So, well, you can, and again, editors of papers, they only have a lot of papers probably spend a lot more money on their legal side of things rather than editorial side of things, which is a shame, because as you see now, there's a lot of papers who are letting a lot of journalists go, and because of that, the public is going to miss out on stories like this, which is the biggest shame of it all.
Yeah, and I was listening to Dave McWilliams recently, and he had a former Spotify economist on, chief economist from Spotify. So he was talking about kind of the new freelance economy, basically, where it's all just you produce your own stuff, like we're doing with a podcast. But we can do this, and it's very, it's not a massive in-depth investigation into something. I read a book, we get a guest, we edit the podcast, and then we interview them. Whereas to devote so much time to actually exposing something like that, you do need the backing of a large corporation. So I'm not sure if a freelance journalist could do something like this.
Oh, not at all. Well, unless they just wanted to go out on their own, they didn't care about the legal consequences, because otherwise, you just wouldn't be able to afford it. And also all the paperwork and stuff like that. He had scared, in the book, in Champagne Football, the Sunday Times solicitors and all would have had to race down to the forecourts because they were only given 2 hours notice, I think, and the case would have been read without the defendees being there, or what's the opposite of the defendees, the other side. Sorry,
I'm at a loss as well. Anyway, everyone knows.
Brain farts for days today. But yeah, it's just that type of stuff. You just can't do those in-depth investigations without financial backing. And that's why you'll probably never see in-depth books like All the President's Men or Champagne Football, that kind of stuff from freelancers.
Yeah, and it's a massive shame, and I think It's so important to hold power to account, because we can see from these accounts of these books that left unchecked and the wrong person's in power.
Exactly, yeah. And how many, it's put Irish football back, God knows how many years, you know? And that's because of the psychopath that was John Delaney, who was running the place, you know?
Yeah. But I always wonder, like, how many of these stories do we not know about?
I'd say, again, like, that's endless amounts, I'd say. Endless.
And that's the thing. And like, it's so important to have this, that at least then we can question things, and you can have at least a proven track record of showing that there is, you know, corruption. And then it kind of helps any whistleblowers that come out as well.
Yeah, exactly. Sure, we saw with the OCI, the ticket scandal over in
Brazil
when, what's his name? I'm trying to look him up here.
Is it Hickey? Is the second name Hickey?
Yeah, Pat Hickey, Castleknock resident Pat Hickey, being dragged out of his Brazil or Rio de Janeiro hotel room wearing nothing but a pair of boxers at 3:00 in the morning, because he was selling tickets for like ridiculous amounts, like on the black market. Like that, there's just been so many administration stories in Ireland where like just cowboys are on them, you know, and just. I think Irish people and Ireland and corruption just goes hand in hand, unfortunately, because we just don't hold people to account.
Do you think that's a cultural thing? Yeah,
absolutely, it's a cultural thing. People like, and also like a lot of things, like a lot of Irish people don't see like the wrong in people doing like small things, and then it just snowballs. Like, you know, like people think if you can get away with it, why wouldn't you do it? Like, you know,
that kind of. You're a cute whore kind
of exactly
attitude.
Yeah.
No, and it's difficult. Not like I'm in Sweden at the minute, and they're very like by the book rules people. Whereas, like when you can get by with a bit of cheating in Ireland, I do think it's.
I know you're kind of like you said, fair play, like a pat on the back if you can get away with like doing shortcuts, you know.
Yeah. But no, I think with that we'll get into the episode. Mark's a unbelievably nice fella as well, and just so interesting, so intelligent as well. You can just tell from speaking to him, and I think
I just recommend Champagne Football to everyone. Like I read it there last year when it came out, went to about 10 different bookshops trying to secure it, and it was sold out, but eventually I got it online. But yeah, it's one of my favorite books I've ever read. It's the in-depth like stories that he gets from like all different sources, and like the story may only last a page, but like you're just like, how is this happening?
Everything's a shock.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So here's our interview with Mark Tighe. Mark Tighe, you're very welcome to the podcast. Thanks a million for coming on. Someone that's been in the news quite a lot recently for some of your exposés into Irish football in particular. So it's a huge honour to have you on.
Yeah, delighted to be on, Owen. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so I suppose, what was the book that you chose for today, and as well, when would you have read this book?
The book I chose was one I read when I started to read when I was doing my journalism course in Galway in 2005, 2006. I did a master's, and it's All the President's Men by Woodward and Bernstein, Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward. It's just a great detective story, a book about journalism. I had the fortune to meet Carl Bernstein then, kind of about a year or two later, and I've subsequently attended a talk by Bob Woodward. Didn't get to meet him, so just, you know, they're two of the kind of giants of modern journalism in terms of, you know, gumshoe journalism. You know, it's getting out, knocking on doors, seeing what happens, talking to sources, and it's kind of it's a great thriller. You know, I remember I saw the movie before I read the book, but definitely the book is better. I remember going into NUI Galway and getting the God, was it a DVD or a VHS? I can't remember. Back then, I'm sitting down and watching it for the first time, and it's a really good movie. You know, the Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford. And I was reading up on it recently, actually, and apparently Woodward and Bernstein only decided to write the book about, you know, how they brought down Richard Nixon effectively. They only decided to write the book when Robert Redford said, you know, I'd option the movie rights off that. So it's interesting to see the role that the cinema and the potential film played in guiding them. And they've written so much about it since, obviously, but it's a book that begged to be written, you know, and something I suppose we leaned on a bit when we came to write Champagne Football, that we could, you know, there were certain chapters where we're in the story, you know, especially around the High Court injunction and the unfolding story in 2019 about, you know, John Delaney in such a strong position and how he battled to stay on. So myself and Paul were kind of writing about how we were in that story and the court cases and the sources coming forward. And I did refer back to All the President's Men, see how they did it, you know, because it's not an usual thing for journalism. The very first thing you're taught almost in when I was in Galway doing my journalism course was, don't put I in the story or me, you know, you're not the story. But when it comes to a book, you have a bit more, I suppose, license and freedom to get behind the scenes of the what's in the headlines and what's in the news stories.
Yeah, it's interesting. And what was Bernstein like? From what I was reading about him recently, he seems like a bit of a player and like a bit of a character in general.
Definitely, yeah. Very, like, I got maybe 2 or 3 minutes with him, you know, had a quick chat with him, just told him I was a journalist. You know, he was doing the Tighe book festival, which David Williams would have organized kind of annually. And I remember getting the dart out to him, and he gave a very engaging talk, you know, about his journalism down the years and working with Bob Woodward. And they're definitely, and you can get that from, which I like from the book, is that they're very clashing personalities. You know, Bob Woodward was really more straight-laced of the two, I think. Bernstein maybe more hot-tempered. And actually, it was great a couple of years ago when Bob Woodward was promoting. Can't remember which one of his books. I think it was Fear.
Fear.
Yeah, maybe it was Rage. Sorry, okay. Which came first?
I actually don't know.
Yeah, one of his Trump books. And Bernstein was a surprise guest. It was great to see the interaction of the two of them, you know, because they're a bit like chalk and cheese. But I suppose that's when good partnerships, that's what you need, and especially in journalism, you need people that are going to push you on. And I got that from Bernstein. You know, he's the guy kind of willing to take risks, you know, and because so much in journalism, you know, you knock on doors or you say, oh, you think, oh, that person's not going to answer my call, and it's great to see, well, you know, you need an editor or maybe a sort of co-writer to say, look, let's try that again or try a different approach, you know. And so there's so many different aspects you can take from that, you know, if journalism is your beat, you know. And so that's really what I took from him, you know, that there's different ways to peel an orange, you know. There's always a different way to approach things, and it's great. And like myself and Paul would definitely be very different personalities, so it definitely works, you know, when you have someone advising, well, you know, if X won't work, let's try Y, you know, even though you would have thought that person wouldn't have been approachable, and sometimes that works, you know, that if you try the person you least expect to talk to you, that can be a bountiful, you know, fountain of information if you can get that person to talk to you.
Yeah. Just for people that might not know a whole lot about Watergate, if you could give kind of a brief, as brief as it could be, I suppose there's so many different layers to it, what it was in its essence and why it was so significant as well, I think is important.
Yeah, so like it's become a kind of byword for scandal now, you know, when you put a fixed gate, a suffix on, you know, to a scandal. We've had everything, you know, Golfgate in Ireland recently. So Watergate was this big office complex in Washington, and it was home to the National Democratic Party's head office, but also the local Democratic Party in DC. And so Bob Woodward would have been on the story originally. He's a Metro reporter, which means like a city reporter with the Washington Post. And these guys, 5 guys, were arrested, basically breaking in to the National Democratic Party. And when it first came to the desk of the Washington Post, they thought this is the local Democratic Party that were getting burgled. And so that's why they put a kind of a local reporter on it, which, you know, it broke. And Woodward attended the court, and there's some guys, interesting characters with national security history. It soon emerged, and basically they kept digging into this, and what they found was a group of kind of clandestine operatives, a lot of them with military or CIA background, that had been working for the campaign to re-elect Richard Nixon, the US president, the Republican president. And basically there was kind of slush funds set up, and they're able to follow the money basically all around America to these kind of mad characters who were going around planting fake stories about Democratic rivals, both kind of at local government level or at national level. And it was all kind of dark arts. They call them the rat fuckers. These guys would do anything to screw over their rivals. And so what Woodward and Bernstein did, they were able to tie this all the way back to the very senior people in and around Richard Nixon, right up to the Attorney General, people in the White House, and obviously Richard Nixon himself. So it was like, all the king's horses, all the king's men, it was all the president's men were involved in this this crazy scheme, and which was funded by so many Republican donors to basically screw over Democratic and sometimes Republican rivals, people that weren't on Nixon's side. And Nixon had not a full overview. He knew they were up to this sort of nonsense, this sort of carry on. And so it's a fantastic story. And eventually, Nixon, the amazing thing was Nixon got, and obviously they were denying. Nearly every Washington Post story was denied, but they were true, and Nixon got reelected, but he eventually resigned. When it was shown how it went right to him, he knew about all this illegal operations that were going on, and all the money that was going clandestinely to these operatives.
It's amazing the amount of parallels, I think, between the current or former Trump administration and Nixon. When I had Mark Little on, he picked Hunter S. Thompson's book on the campaign trail in '72, and it's like the kind of doom and gloom for when Nixon was about to be re-elected. It was kind of similar to the 2020 election, when the kind of fear that Trump would get re-elected, and then I suppose you've got the kind of corruption that Nixon was proven to, and Trump was kind of, he's kind of more out there and more in the public, that he's done, like he's more obviously corrupt than Nixon was, kind of in the background. I'm not sure if you got the sense of that like the kind of present day and the similarities between now and back then.
Yes, definitely. And there's a kind of there's even people that were involved in Watergate at a junior level that were involved with Trump and some of his dirty tactics, and encouraging him to get involved with the Russians, encouraging him to leak Hillary Clinton's emails. So yeah, like there's a sequence that continues on to this day. When Trump pardoned some of these people, then when the FBI got them banged to rights and they were lying to the FBI. So definitely, it's you can track that genius of operatives, all the way to modern day and Trump, and sure, all the it's obviously morphed so much since Nixon's time, but you see similar kind of traits, where Nixon was disparaging journalists, disparaging the likes of New York Times and Washington Post, and the big networks that were covering the story. And so Trump very much adopted that playbook as well, where he branded anyone that was against some fake news. I suppose what's changed since then is that I suppose most of the Washington, or sorry, the American media would have been on Nixon's case, and following up, trying to follow up the Washington Post's kind of groundbreaking journalism. Whereas nowadays, Trump would have had his own separate media sphere, where people kind of have this echo chamber where, like, the likes of Fox News, Newsmax, One American News, Epoch Times, all these very Republican supporting media organizations, where they act as an echo chamber, for these mad conspiracies like that the election was stolen. And where it's come to, what was it, a majority of Republicans believe that the presidential election in 2020 was actually stolen. It's just extraordinary. So it still, I suppose, if you hark back to Watergate, and it shows the importance of good journalism, to expose this. But what's scary, I suppose, nowadays is that you can have all that great journalism, like to show, what is the facts, but you'll have alternative media now pushing propaganda and false narratives to a fact, that you have something like the big protest on January 6th. It turned into an attack on the US Capitol, because they so believed what Trump was spinning. And that's kind of scary. Imagine if that had happened back in the 70s, that people would have attacked, who I know, done some sort of attack on the FBI or something, or attack on the Washington Post, because of what Nixon had been spinning, But so you have similar kind of stances from both presidents, really. But what's scary is, suppose, you had Trump was so amplified by that right-wing media, but also, I suppose, social media that he was able to use so powerfully up until near the end, that he was able to amplify his false narratives on, the likes of Facebook and Twitter.
Do you think that's been the complete game changer then in that kind of 50-year period that's led to this complete misinformation, social media, or is it like a mix of different things?
It's a mix. In America, you don't have same requirements we have in Ireland or in a lot of European countries for fairness and balance. And that's clearly, it's lacking on both sides. You see CNN be completely partisan on so many issues, against Republicans or against Trump on many things, but never to the same extent as Fox News, and then Fox News kind of being outflanked even on the right by the likes of Newsmax and One American News Network. So like what's his name, Roger Ailes, and what he did with Fox, it's horrible. Ignoring facts and building up kind of these false narratives on the Republican side, creating a lot of straw men, fears over immigration and things that would really rile up the right wing in America, and that's been a scary thing to witness in the last 20-30 years. But I think then, the social media companies have come in and just amplified that and made it into a weapon of mass destruction, and you can see how that's happened with the targeting on Facebook, the way it's been proven that foreign governments, hostile governments, can back one side and organize like Black Lives Matter protests and anti-Black Lives Matter protests, all from the same side, all with the target of riling up the American electorate. That Putin and Russia did this kind of thing is just extraordinary, and people don't even know they're being played like pawns and targeted on social media. And so, like Zuckerberg, and I think even Twitter, have a lot to answer for, and they were way too slow in responding to that. And getting away from politics, I cover a lot of misinformation now over the pandemic, and it's just shocking to see the amount of misinformation, especially on Twitter and Facebook, which affects so many people. Spreading mistruths about the vaccines and the dangers and lies about masks and so much. So it's so easy to find this stuff, and we reach such a wide audience. And while look, the media isn't perfect, and we make a lot of mistakes, and we have our biases. We can be sued. We have regulation. The press ombudsman, defamation, but social media companies just seem to get away with it's close. It's like the old saying, "Get away with murder," but it's just causing so much harm. The disinformation that's allowed to be pumped out on these hugely powerful sites.
Yeah. Just on the defamation, I see news brands came out this week and want to kind of have a massive overhaul of the defamation laws in Ireland. They said they're the strictest in Europe, I think they said. And obviously, as you said, in the States, they have a lot more kind of freedom with what they can publish. What's your kind of take on that? And like for you, when you were reporting on the John Delaney stuff, like I think you were mentioning in an interview before that I think Dion Fanning had said something to John Delaney in an interview years before, and it kind of was clear that everyone kind of knew that John Delaney was up to no good years before actually anything could be said. And I think, is that down to the defamation laws, or was that just down to you need so much evidence?
Yeah, I'd agree with news brands. Like they're the representative body for Irish newspapers that, in Western Europe, and in the English speaking world, actually, I think Ireland is the most, along with Northern Ireland, scarily enough, is the most draconian place for to be a journalist in terms of dealing with defamation law. Look, you can go too far in the other way. I suppose, like America, I'd be very interested to see, the voting companies that are suing the likes of Newsmax and others. I think I don't know if they're don't think they're suing Trump, but they're definitely suing a lot of the broadcast companies to spread all this false information about how their voting systems had been hacked or used, to push Trump out of power. So it'd be great to see how those defamation cases run. Like I think defamation law is important. If you get something wrong, you should be able to sue and you should be able to get compensation. But like what's scary in Ireland is, the biggest award ever, which was reduced by the Supreme Court to 1.5 million. So it was 10 million by a high court, and it's been reduced to about 1.5 million, which is still a huge amount of money. If you think about it, like the most awards you can get for a personal injury in Ireland is about 500,000 euro. So it's 3 times that amount. Like, and it just, so, and in that case, it was a company that got sued, putting out a press release about an executive who'd been sleepwalking naked, and he went into a bedroom of a female employee in Africa. It was kind of a bizarre story, and he didn't like the press release that it was, he was saying this is an innocent mistake, and they were saying there was something more to it, or he said they implied that there was something more to it. Now, should that have resulted in a 10 million euro award, where if you're in a catastrophic injury and someone has actually harmed you, you can, 500,000 is the most you can get? Clearly not. So this is the kind of the sword of Damocles that hangs over everyone in Irish journalism, that if you get something wrong, you could be in the High Court, you could have an award of 1.5 million against you. Plus, say if you're in, like the Business Post took on Dennis O'Brien back in 2019, that was a 1 month High Court case. So there would have been legal costs in around 1 million euro hanging on that result, never mind the award, and they won that. And I've been covering defamation cases for 15 years, and I don't think I've actually seen a trial where a newspaper had won before. I couldn't remember one. There's been a few draws, and they had to settle where the jury was being hung or whatever. But it's so rare to see an Irish jury actually come in favor of a newspaper, And Dennis Bryan had a number of awards in his favor. So it's just the way the law is constructed with defamation is that, and it's so unique and kind of in civil law, that if you're suing for defamation, you don't have to prove that you've been defamed, that your reputation has been lowered. The journalists or the newspaper have to come in and prove the opposite. They have to prove that what you're claiming is wrong. So the whole the requirement to prove your case isn't really there, as it would be in any other civil case. If I'm suing you for breach of contract, I have to prove you've breached the contract. It's not the same if I'm suing you for defamation. It's kind of, I can go in and say, oh, you've lowered my reputation by what you've published, and it's not the same. So in the UK, they brought in this thing showing you have to prove damage. And that's a very basic, you think that would be a basic requirement in Irish law, but it's not there, even though our defamation law is only 10, 11 years old. There was a reform in 2009. So like there could be 2 simple things. Yeah, like if they could show that you have to prove damage, like your reputation has been damaged, that would be a huge shift in the goalposts. And then a cap on awards. If damages were capped at sensible levels, instead of, because it has this chilling effect. If you think you're going to publish something, you could be sued, and it could put the newspaper out of business or your radio station. An editor was just going to make an economic decision. So no, we're not going to touch that. And yeah, it did. Getting back to John Delaney, when he was brought in, when he was made CEO in late 2004 on an interim basis, Dion Fanning asked him, "Are you being brought in? Are you taking up this position, as interim CEO, so you can cover up the books? You can keep secret what's going on here?" So there was a smell about him. There was concerns about him from the get-go. A few years later, the Sunday Independent wrote a piece, a kind of a funny piece, just a little paragraph saying that there was a magazine, FAI magazine, and had like 1 or 2 photos of John Delaney in every page of their 8 pages, maybe 16 pages, and they were like, they just made a joke saying this is like Ceausescu, it's propaganda, just extolling the great leader. The next week they had to do a groveling apology to John Delaney, saying we did not mean to compare him to a dictator. We apologize most sincerely, and that was just a funny joke. Like everyone, like in Irish football, would have compared him to Ceausescu or North Korean dictator, given the kind of cult of personality that he promoted in the FAI and the football body and the football family, as he called. But that's how cowed he had his lawyers on speed dial, and it definitely prevented other journalists from pushing at him and made sure other editors, unfortunately, they preferred to curry his favor and become his friends rather than take on a kind of a proper watchdog position to hold him to account and to investigate a lot of the idiosyncrasies and the concerns people had about the way he was running the FAI's finances. So yeah, look, I think Irish defamation law has a lot to answer for why we have so many scandals, or why such people are allowed to stay in power for so long. Go back to Charles Tighe and all the crack there. That boil could have been lanced a lot earlier by journalists, or like Peter Murtaugh, who wrote a fantastic book, The Boss. He co-wrote, which I highly recommend. It's kind of like an Irish version of All the President's Men, but they were highlighting all this madness, then, but he was able to carry on.
So, like, is it the case that journalists know so much more at a given moment about anything, or is that kind of conspiratorial to think that in a way that there's
yeah, there's a bit, like, there's loads of stuff we'd be told but you can't prove, but so, like, I'm not saying let's get rid of those thresholds where we can go and print stuff that we can't prove, because that's not what we want to do, but I think we could ask a lot more questions and put stuff out there that people have concerns about various organizations without the fear of being sued. That's not possible in a lot of cases now. So, like, going back to the FAI is a solid example, so we wouldn't get sued talking about other things. There was loads of people who wanted to raise questions about the finances, and like RTE did said some innocent stuff, and they got defamation writ served on them, and so it just has the effect of having a chilling effect. It freezes any further investigation. Journalism often works on increments. You break a story, or you raise a question about something, and you publish the story, and then you might get some follow-up. You'll get maybe someone go, well, do you know about this? Do you know about, can I talk to you about this? And so if you can't crack open that first gap, by publishing a story, raising questions, you'll not get to step 2, or step 3, and because it's very rare you have a story will just go bomb, this is the scandal. Journalism, and investigative journalism often works by increments, and it's very important sometimes to get that initial story out, and sometimes then the people you need to talk to will make sure that they contact you,
is it like, kind of in the book they have, like, these sources, like, I think the most famous one is Deep Throat, and he's the kind of FBI guy that they have on the inside, or CIA guy, and he speaks to Woodward, and in the movie in particular, it's in a car park, it's real shady stuff. I'm not sure if you had any sources like that, but I was kind of struck as well by and I'm struck by this a lot in journalism, is why do sources speak to journalists, and what is in it for them? It seems like, for yourself, it must be a lot of relationship building and building trust, and that must take quite a lot of time.
Yeah. There can be often a lot of different reasons. Sometimes people are motivated by revenge. They've been done down. They can have personal skin in the game, and they don't like someone. So you have to be so careful as a journalist that just because they are motivated by revenge doesn't mean what they're telling you isn't true, but obviously it can taint what they're saying. So handle with caution, and try. I'd often, when you're establishing that relationship, I'd often try and get to what are their motives, because it helps me evaluate, how far can I trust them, or do I need to be especially cautious with the information they're giving me. With going back to the John Delaney story, like, after we got that initial story, which was about the check, and we won the court case in the High Court, that was an anonymous tip-off we got, so we didn't know the motivation of the whistleblower, or the person who came forward. But after that, there was a variety of people came forward, and there was a real fear among a lot of them, because I suppose they feared that Delaney could sue them personally. Some of the the FAI whistleblowers that came forward, some of the internal staff that came forward. Like Delaney did rule with an iron fist, and staff that would have left would have to sign non-disclosure agreements. So he had that power over them. I can sue you, I can take you to court. But also, on top of that, people had experience that their family members could be harmed. If they worked in football, a lot of people who work in football, their family members would be coaches or they'd be in certain teams. So, Delaney would have made sure to let people know, if he'd know their connections, he'd have power to influence how they get on in different teams, power to get rid of them. So there was a real fear among a lot of the people that contacted us that, if it was discovered who they were talking, that their family members could suffer. And so you have to be so careful and dealing with them to protect their identities and know the risks that they're taking, because and understand then the caution that they have coming forward, and why they hadn't come forward. And I found a lot of the people that contacted me, I'm a news reporter, that Delaney would have had such good relationships with a lot of the sports editors, and some of the sports journalists, not most of them really at the end, that they did, but he let it be known that he had these contacts on sports desks, that there was a distrust of Irish journalists among some of the people that would have talked to me, and me being a news journalist helped, that they felt they could speak to me because I wasn't Delaney didn't have that influence over my editor, or that he could have had over other editors. So that was important. I was going to say to you, another book I read around that same time, it's an important book. It obviously has a writer as Laptop Dancing and the Nanny Goat Mambo. It's a book about Tom Humphreys, who was kind of the top Irish sports journalist back in the noughties, and obviously I've covered him since. Obviously he was convicted in terms of what he did with an underage girl who was on his hurling team. But like I remember reading that book back when I was a student journalist, and it was a real good behind the scenes look at Irish journalism. And again, Humphreys talks about dealing with defamation law and getting one thing wrong and having to apologize and pay out a huge amount of money. But also he talks about kind of how sports journalists, and it convinced me not to be a sports journalist reading that book. He's talking about hanging around a team bus trying to catch a guy for a quote, and how these 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds are looking at him with disdain. And I was like, oh God, okay, that sounds awful, and maybe I'll do news journalism instead.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I always find that funny, and I always find with sports journalism, it must be difficult to separate being a fan than being kind of a journalist. I'm not sure if what you think of that, but like if you're covering like news or politics, you usually don't have too much skin in the game for most things.
Yeah, there's some brilliant sports journalists, and like the FAI story, like Emmett Malone in the Irish Times, Paul Rowan with us, John Fallon is a freelance writer, Danny McDonnell in the Irish Independent. They did some fantastic work, and you could see they were on Tony O'Donoghue and RTE. You could see because we got so many of the minutes from the FAI board. You could see Delaney, he hated these people, hated these journalists, and he accused them of having agendas, but they did some great reporting. They covered the matches, but they were doing stuff on the FAI's finances, which we built on, and we were able to refer back to. And it's great reportage, So I think Irish sports journalists, football journalists did do a great job, kind of holding Delaney to account as much as they could, But yeah, like I'm an Everton fan, I'm an Ireland fan. I go to the matches. Yeah, I like being able to separate the two, and but I suppose it worked in my favor that the news journalists coming onto the scene as we did in the last couple of years. It's coming in a bit cold, I suppose, but from following all that reporting and as a fan, I knew enough about where to go and what the problems were.
Yeah. And when you're doing these stories, one of the kind of interesting things I thought from the book was kind of the internal politics. And as you said, Woodward was kind of just lucky to get on that story. He probably wouldn't have got put on it if they had realized it was the actual national headquarters.
Yeah.
And, kind of fighting their case in particular, to kind of get the stories published with their editors, and then also trying to work with each other. And at the start, you can tell they think they're competing, but then they have to realize, the best bet is to work together. Like, is that a thing? Is there a lot of like internal competition? And obviously things move day to day in a newspaper a lot more than other environments. Is it very stressful?
Yeah, like I definitely in the early years I would have definitely struggled with the stress, of like there's deadlines every week, you have kind of a quota of stories to fulfill. The good thing about working for a Sunday paper and Sunday Times give you a lot of freedom, a good bit of freedom into, what you bring to the table, what stories you can get in. So if you're passionate about something, you can and your editor trusts you, you can bring those things, and say, let's write about this. And so like with me and Paul Rowan, who's our soccer correspondent, he's based in England. He covered like Premier League games every weekend, but be back for the Ireland international. So whenever he'd come back to Ireland and Dublin, I'd be make sure to have a chat with him. What can we do about Delaney? And we've had a good working relationship over the years. We would have worked together on a few FAI stories, and it really took off then in 2019 as I broke those initial stories, and like I would have consulted with Paul before all of them. And there was other journalists working for other papers, or John Fallon in particular, who's a freelancer who I would have checked in with, and he's such a deep well of contacts that he was just very helpful. So you can have that kind of rivalry, but also kind of the collegiate thing, where you help each other out, and there's always a balance. Like just on other stories down the years, yeah, there's sometimes, you're fighting over them. Like I remember a journalist who's not with Sunday Times anymore, losing the rag, because he was a business journalist, and I picked up on a story he was covering, and I'd always try and work together on these things, and go like, oh, you're working on that, let's put heads together. But he just lost it because start effing him blind and like, this is my story, and so you still have those hotheads. But I always find, look, if two heads are better than one on these things, the more angles you can cover, the better. I try not to be territorial about things. Maybe some people might accuse me of being. I'm trying to think if I ever done the same, but I don't think I have. But
And when you found out in 2019 the kind of 100,000 check, or the reimbursement, in the book, when they find a new kind of source, and obviously in the movie in particular as well, you kind of see the light bulb moment go off, and everyone, like, they're really happy when you find things out. Obviously you're an Irish football fan, and in the sense it's a very negative thing what's been done, but it's obviously going to make the story, and it's going to make it like, is it a real, like, celebrating a goal at a football match type moment, or is it like shock, or how do you feel when you find these massive
yeah,
pieces of evidence?
it is kind of a little bit pump your fist kind of, like when I had that check, because it was an anonymous source, it wasn't enough for us to go to print on. It could have been a fake, it could have been someone trying to set us up, so I worked on that for 2 weeks, and eventually I was able to get talking to two sources who had knowledge of it. And so that was real, like, I was like, we have this, and I'm happy to go with it. I talked to my editor about, I'm happy now that I think, what we have in those anonymous delivery is good, and obviously that was everything was kind of concentrated then into that moment in the High Court then, because um we, Delaney was there in a suit. So it's very rare you're sitting in a room opposite the person you're about to write a story about, and it was just crazy, because if the judge had said no, the story was dead, and we were almost left with a blank section on the front page. But because we actually had the judge then who had all our details, all our homework effectively, we didn't give him the story, but we said we were willing to kind of go in the witness box and talk about it. And then he said, there's a significant public interest in this, and Delaney dropped his head. I nearly did, punch the air on that occasion, because we had kind of judicial approval to put a story out there, and almost we still had a concern that Delaney could sue us over the story. The lawyer was concerned we were casting aspersions on him, and he could sue us for defamation. And to kind of have the judge say, well, this is all really important, and the public need to know this. It kind of was armor plating the story, meaning Delaney couldn't come after us. So it was kind of a double win for us, and like, little did we know that the story would kind of snowball. There'd be kind of an avalanche effect after that, with more people coming forward. It's kind of what we hoped, but yeah, that in terms, but when you get stories over the line, yeah, it's always a great moment if you've been working on something for a long time and you get that kind of last piece of the jigsaw, to prove, that what you suspected is true, and you can get it into print.
Mm. And one thing, like from Nixon gets pardoned then by Gerald Ford, so he doesn't serve any time for any of this. And whatever you think about Watergate, what Nixon did with the war on drugs and with various different things during his time as president, um, I don't think he was the best person, and I think probably deserves some prison time for a lot of this stuff. But with Delaney, and he's kind of over in the UK or wherever he is at the minute, it's like I think a lot of people have frustration with the Irish system. Even say the likes of the Davy scandal recently, that the kind of people in those positions of power just often get off scot free, and yeah, okay, their reputation's a bit tainted, but does that the end punishment doesn't really feel like it fits the crime.
Yeah, well, like especially in Delaney's case, he got a 367,000 sign off. So like I was talking to people on the FAI board, would you not sue this guy for he paid 80,000 euro for his birthday party? Okay, he compensated 50, but he still spent 30 grand on his birthday party. You were paying his rent when it wasn't in his contract. So he paid tens of thousands of euros out to his ex-girlfriend. So many things that was completely wrong. But look, the story isn't over on that front. There's an ongoing criminal investigation. What I'd say is Irish white collar law is very poor. We're very poorly financed and supported in terms of the policing investigation, like the Office of Director of Corporate Enforcement, which are carrying out this investigation into the FAI and Delaney. They have something like 6 or 7 Gardaí full, altogether. They're maybe a little bit more than that, and they're going to double that, and still not enough. There is going to be a new corporate enforcement agency set up to police this area, but it's so undermanned at the moment. Like they've been fighting for over a year now to get Delaney's emails. There's 250,000 emails that they're almost finished going through for legal privilege, and then they'll be in the hands of the Gardaí. So look, that story is definitely not over. People have asked us if we do a second book on it, and I think possibly, depending where it goes. If there are charges in a court case, I think there'll be a lot more to come out. We've only gone so deep as we can, given Irish defamation laws as well. We have to be very careful writing the book as well. So yeah, but I can understand people's frustrations now. It's like it's coming on. It's over 2 years since we published a lot of those stories, and to see him working away in England, kind of without any ramifications other than his reputation being affected, it sticks in a lot of people's craw. I can understand that. So there's a lot of pressure on the Gardaí and the ODCE to kind of bring this one to fruition.
And like this something pissed me off a lot now, I have to say. You read another story, and who's auditing this company? It's Deloitte, KPMG, or whatever, the big four. And it's always one of them, and then one of them gets audited by the other to check what they've done, and it's just this cycle. And then obviously they get on the next job, and I don't really understand, and I'd like to hear your opinions on where do we go if we constantly allow the people that are supposed to audit these companies to get away with a shabby job.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. Like Deloitte were the FAI's auditors for over 20 years, and what they allowed happen was appalling. And I was there at the AGM in City West, and the figure that even stood out the most for me was that they'd been paid €500,000 over the last 2 years. So they were being paid this gigantic sum of money for failure, absolute failure, and coming out with these tart statements that we fulfilled all our obligations, and the only thing they'd say is that we were misled. They kept saying, by the FAI themselves. So they missed all these transactions. We had FAI delegates standing up saying, sorry, did you check John Delaney's expenses? Did you check his credit card, do any spot checks? And no answers. I refer you back to my statement. Like they were standing there or sitting there. They wouldn't even stand up actually in the front row in City West, and not refusing to answer questions after pocketing €500,000. And FAI plunged into existential crisis, needing a €50 million bailout from the state, because of the level of debt that have been allowed to accrue, because of the crazy expenditure that have been allowed to happen. So yeah, in that case, I think Deloitte really should have held their hands up. Now, I understand like they're under investigation by their regulators at the moment into what happened. So that story again isn't finished. But it's, as you say, we're seeing this over and over again. We're seeing it with Boher, the Irish charity. You know, they've what happened? How do their auditors allow that kind of misappropriation of funds to happen? Anglo-Irish Bank, Ernst & Young in that case. How do they allow these bed and breakfast loans to happen? So yeah, it's a huge problem that these big accountancy firms are pocketing gargantuan fees annually and not doing the work clearly. And then it's galling because you have, like, we work very hard as journalists to break these stories, and what I always find frustrating is then they bring in another auditing firm like Mazars in the case of the FAI, who get paid a whack of money to follow up, and not that Mazars did anything wrong in this case, but they pocket a huge sum of money for the failure of another accountancy firm to kind of come in and fix things up. Or Grant Thornton then came in to try and fix things up, and it's they keep winning. Yeah, it's just appalling. I can't offer a solution, but I definitely think there should be repercussions for when they fail, and maybe that would make them do their jobs better.
It is one of the most incredible things though, because it's not just like they're an Irish thing. This is worldwide, and they're brought in for everything. As you said, one makes a mistake, the other gets brought in, and it's just like this revolving door of accounting firms, and then they do a lot of consulting work for the government as well and various things. And I don't know, and it's one of the most frustrating things, particularly when it's the FAI, where I would have loved going to the games growing up and to see something fall down so badly like that probably could have been stopped.
Yeah, like and as we uncovered, like in the book, we published some of the emails. Like Deloitte did raise questions about why were we paying John Delaney €39,000 for his rent? And sorry, did they check his contract to say that he wasn't actually entitled to that? Very basic stuff. And the one good improvement I think has been brought in, that they have to rotate auditors now more. That wasn't a requirement previously. That you can clearly see that auditors become beholden to their clients. And I think they need to go further though. I think they need to outlaw auditors doing other work, like giving tax advice to firms, when they're also acting as a watchdog. So it clearly doesn't work, when you have auditing firms, accountancy firms, working both ends of the stick, helping companies to avoid tax or giving other kind of financial advice while also checking their books. It's just open to abuse and misuse, and just it sullies the relationship, and that happens so much still, and it's something that has to stop.
Yeah, sorry, I just find it crazy, but I won't keep you too much longer. But just the kind of loyalty to Richard Nixon that was felt in the Republican Party, and that was something we see still to this day with Trump in the Republican Party, and that's obviously something that was quite obvious with John Delaney as well, that there's this kind of loyalty to the
all the executive vice presidents, man. Yeah.
But how do you think I assume he's not that good a person, John Delaney or Nixon or Trump. They don't come across very likable. What do you think is the common trait there? That is it just that they have this kind of sense of power that they've gained and then they can hold it over you, or is it they have this charisma that no one knows about?
Yeah, it's a big mixture of the two. I think I think Bob Woodward actually captured it well in Fear. That you have that mixture of charisma and fear. So that really buys loyalty. And I see a common trait. It was great actually when Fear was out, Champagne Football was out. And I remember taking a picture in a book in where was it? Dewberry Books on Grafton Street, up to beside each other. It was a great moment for me to see my book beside Bob Woodward's latest book. And I do see a lot of like Trump, or Delaney was called to trump up the FAI by Kevin O'Keefe at their Oireachtas hearing. We made sure to put that quote in the book. And you do see common traits. It's like to get to the top, you do need some charisma. To be that leader that people will follow, and people will suffer in your cause. But also then the fear. And the other common trait, is that kind of hatred of the media, which both men inspire, or encourage, like Delaney would have portrayed all Irish media that ask questions as disloyal. And that's very much something that Nixon and Trump would have done as well. This is disloyal. You're tarnishing the president, the office of the president, by asking these horrible questions, being so confrontational. You're damaging Irish football. That was the thing that would have been thrown at journalists, that they don't understand football, or they're damaging football in Delaney's case. So you do see these common traits among these leaders, who, and the culture of secrecy builds up then as well, that potential whistleblowers are, will be branded disloyal if they come forward and reveal what's actually going on. So yeah, you see these traits repeating themselves over and over, and it's remarkable to see it play out that way. So I think that moniker, and when Kevin O'Keefe said it, he was saying it as a compliment to Delaney, that he's the Trump of the FAI, the way the media were against him. But I thought it was very apt. I could definitely see all these. They definitely shared a lot of characteristics. And the other thing is, to be that kind of leader that will do a lot of wrong things, you need a kind of a lot of self-love, or a lot of narcissism, to believe in yourself, to that you're more important than the organization, that you can do these things that are actually harming. Like in Delaney's case, he was doing things that were harming Irish football, to make sure that the stadium stayed afloat, grassroots, where he was throwing them the odd $5,000 check. They were suffering, in terms of development compared to other sports in Ireland. Like football used to be the biggest played sport in Ireland. Participation was being passed out by the GAA, and if you talk to any coach in a summer school, the GAA has just really surpassed the FAI on that front. Unfortunately, I'm a football fan, so I would say unfortunately. And like in America, like Trump, you can see, he damaged discourse. So did Nixon. They damaged the discourse, public discourse and politics. It became you're either with us or against us kind of thing, which George Bush W would have said as well. Not just dumping all the Republicans, but it's so damaging what's happened, in America with the way, he would spin these lies about the election being stolen. But he did it all, and because he's such a narcissist, he believes that he should be in power forever and a day,
Yeah.
So that's another common trait I see, that narcissistic behavior and attitude, that you're more important than the organization that you're leading.
Yeah. But no, absolutely fantastic book, and unbelievable to speak to you. And just thanks so much for coming on. A real pleasure.
Yeah, really enjoyed it, Owen. Thanks. I really loved the podcast series. Keep it going.
Cheers. Thanks, man, Mark.